Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Welcome. Glad you're all here. My name is Dan Harris. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Network of Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies, affectionately known as INCRA. And I just have a little bit to say. Honest, I don't have a lot of remarks, but I want to welcome you to the 2016 Higher Education Forum, Collaborating for Success, Transforming the Future, because that's the work in which we're engaged. And as you know, it's higher education institutions play a critical role in providing coursework for the early care and education workforce, both in the current and the future, and we are fortunate in Illinois to have a very strong teacher preparation programs kind of throughout the system. And there's currently around 80 higher education programs that have embedded early childhood programs. And of those 85% have embedded gateways, credentials, requirements. So that's fantastic. That's really fantastic. We're grateful for that. Thanks. It's always important to have one applause starter in the audience. I've tried to sprinkle a few throughout, so thank you. Thank you for that. We have currently we're closing in on 20,000 credentials issued throughout the state. That's fantastic. We're very grateful for that. And we have a few coming in through the pipeline. There'll be a family specialist credential, a family child care credential, school age and youth development credential, and a technical assistance credential. So we're very excited about that. This is the part of the program where I thank people because this is kind of like Christmas, where a whole bunch of other people do the work and the fat guy in the suit takes the credit for it. So I'm the fat guy in the suit. Other people did all the work. But seriously, I want to give a sincere thank you, express my gratitude for the people that helped make this possible through their support. That includes the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development. We have representation here. The Robert R. McCormick Foundation, the Illinois Head Start Association, as well as the Early Childhood Center of Professional Development, the Community College Board, the Board of Higher Ed, and the State Board of Education. So thank those organizations for their support of this event. There was also a planning committee for this event. I don't know if any of you have been involved in planning something like this, but it's a lot of work. And so there was a Higher Education Forum Planning Committee that included faculty from around the state, representatives from some of those organizations that I just named. And if there are folks in the audience from the planning committee, stand up maybe so we can thank you. That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I also like to thank my staff. Because there's INCRA staff did a lot of work on this event. Joni Scritchlow could not be here. She was one of the main folks involved in moving this forward and doing a lot of the work that led to it. She couldn't be here, but Julie, Andy, Teresa, Alicia, other folks that are from INCRA, if you could please stand up. Thank you. Thank you very much for all your work on this. So I'm going to welcome today's presenters. That includes, and I'll give a more detailed introduction for at least one of these folks, Dr. James Applegate, who's the Executive Director of the Board of Higher Education, Dr. Stephanie Bernatite. A lot of folks with doctors in their names. I never got that. I still have some PhD work to do, actually. Christy Chadwick, Dr. Nancy Latham, Joellen Whitehead from INCRA is going to give a presentation, and this evening our keynote speaker will be Dr. Sheila Smith. So I've tried to get all my smart alecky remarks out of the way before I introduce Dr. James Applegate, who currently serves as the Executive Director for the Illinois Board of Higher Education, and as the State Higher Education Executive Officer, Dr. Applegate leads efforts to dramatically expand college opportunity in Illinois, especially for low-income, first-generation adult and students of color. He also works to increase higher education's contributions to Illinois' economic and civic health as part of advancing Illinois' public agenda. Prior to assuming this position, he served as vice president for the Lumina Foundation, the largest U.S. foundation solely focused on improving higher education. And in that role, he led the in increasing the effectiveness of the Foundation's program supporting achievement of Goal 2025 to dramatically increase educational attainment in the U.S., especially for the low-income, first-generation minority and adult students. And he led the entire program staff at Lumina, developing new approaches to strategically invest their $50 million grant budget. He also led their convening strategy designed to mobilize key constituencies across multiple sectors to support education improvement. Quite a lot of work. He also served as an advocate for improving higher education performance, engaging in more than 40 keynotes and presentations annually. And prior to joining Lumina, he served as Senior Fellow and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Kentucky State Higher Education System, and did a lot of pretty amazing stuff there. And I can tell you that, well, I'll try and finish this before I get to the personal remarks. He's also, he was elected president of the National Communication Association, the world's largest association of communication scholars. He's published research and conducted seminars. He earned his BA from Georgetown College, as well as MA and PhD from the University of Illinois. And his dissertation, by the way, received the award given the most outstanding dissertations completed in his field. And I've had the pleasure of sitting at a number of tables with Dr. Applegate in his current roles over the last several years. And I can tell you, he is a big picture thinker, a strategic thinker, and he's one of those guys that can translate the big picture and data so that I can get it, right? So he's a straight talker, and I'm grateful for that. And he's also an extraordinary advocate for this work and what we're trying to do here. So thank you, Dr. Applegate. Let's all give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Is there a clicker? The clicker. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. It's really great to be here. I spent a little bit of, just explain to folks, a little bit of a rough morning down in Springfield around budget issues. So it's great to be in an environment where people are here doing the good work that really benefits our state and the people of our state. And thank you for that. We have much of that going on around Illinois despite everything else that's going on. You know, you guys work to prepare the early childhood educators. My wife was one for 38 years before she retired. She worked entirely with low-income and developmentally delayed students to give them the early start that they needed to succeed going forward. And we know from the research that that is so important. We used to sometimes, sitting around the dinner table all those years, I would start complaining about things that went on in my work in higher ed or in state capital or whatever, and then she would start telling me about the challenges of her work, and that was when I would suggest we not talk about work anymore and think of other topics, because she wins. Her job was so much harder than mine. And we're seeing more and more data these days that is telling us that yes, access to early childhood education is extremely important, and we're behind the curve nationally in providing that access. But there's more and more research coming out now saying it's not just access to any early childhood education, it's access to quality early childhood education. There's a recent study that came out comparing outcomes for various types of early childhood programs, and those programs that put a lot of energy and effort into the preparation and quality of their teaching staff were the ones that were having the most dramatic impact on the kids. Well, duh. That's not exactly something we needed massive research to tell us, but a lot of times I think we just put programs out there and think, well, kids are attending something, so it must be okay, and that apparently doesn't work. So I'm so happy that you are here today, and also I will tell you, Stephanie keeps me updated. Which way do I point this? It's an arrow. That should go forward, right? Oh, turning it on. No, that didn't work. There you go. There you go. First of all, I want to celebrate the work that you've done. Some of that was mentioned a little bit earlier. When I was at the Lumina Foundation, the Holy Grail term was scale. Foundations are wonderful at putting out little money to fund a particular program, and then it succeeds, and then they just expect that some prairie fire will occur, and somehow, because that program worked, it will spread across the countryside. I actually used that prairie fire analogy in Georgia speaking a few weeks ago, and they didn't know what a prairie fire were, but I'm assuming here in Illinois we know what a prairie fire is. But it never worked, and so thinking about how you build scale. I've been in Illinois for 2 years now, and in a state this size, there's not a single problem that we have around getting better in higher ed and getting better in our education system that somebody isn't able to point me to a pocket of work somewhere that has solved that problem and doing great things. And the Illinois coat is just full of pockets. I mean, but the question is, how do you make that part of the water supply? And you're doing that. We are so proud to be working with so many of our institutions across the state as we're scaling this across all of our teacher preparation programs, as we're increasing the gateway entitlements, as we're making partnerships and articulation programs work. And I want to say, and I'll say this several times today, the work you are doing is so important in its own right, but you're creating a model that helps us understand how to make other work work. And transfer and articulation is one of those areas where you're creating all kinds of wonderful insights and models on that. I will tell you, there's been a lot of good news about Illinois higher education lately. So in the midst of all the gloom and doom of the budget crisis, impasse or disaster or whatever word we're using these days, I want you to know that recently a lot of good news has come out. Now, unfortunately, a lot of this data, because you know how data lags, is 2014 data. That's the latest we have, so it sort of precedes anything that's currently going on. The great tragedy would be if this particular stuff hurts that trending upward. But we've got good data to show, for example, and you're a part of this, that Illinois ranks third in the country in the number of community college graduates who complete a baccalaureate degree. I mean, I don't know how many times people have told me in the 2 years I've been here, that transfer thing's all messed up. Well, I'm so glad I have this data point now, because it was so messed up. Why are we the third best in the country? If you start full-time at a private or public university in Illinois, within 6 years, 9 out of 10 of our folks end up with a degree. It may not always be the same institution, but 87% of students who start full-time at Illinois private and public universities get a degree in 6 years. That's pretty good. Our community colleges rank fourth in the country for full students who start full-time at community colleges in getting them out with a credential and degree. We are the best in the country in graduating adults. Now, we need about 500,000 more adults in our system, given that 1/5 of our workforce has some college and no degree. But when we get them there, we apparently do a pretty darn good job of getting them to some kind of credential and degree. I want to say all that because I want to talk more about the good work you're doing, but you're a part of a system here that is good and is trending upward. The Lumina Foundation just came out. You mentioned with my prior, I spent a lot of time at Lumina Foundation talking about the 60 by 2025 degree. And it just released its most recent Stronger Nation Through Higher Education report. And if you don't read that report, I highly recommend you do. But it shows good news for Illinois. Now, we went up about 1% in the percent of our workforce that has 2 or 4 year degrees. That doesn't from 43 to about 44. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it doesn't look bad compared to other states. The good news is this year, for the first time, they included certifications and certificates with significant labor market impact, and 6% of Illinoisans have those. That's compared to a national average of 4%, which means, folks, we've always wanted to count those. We want to count all the certificates that you're doing here for the early childhood work, and we will work them in because they're meaningful. And they're also a first step, and you guys do such a great job with, I don't know if I have it up here, but your stackable program. Stackable credentials is the 21st century way to do higher education. And you're doing that work. But we want to do that because it becomes a stepping stone for people to get started It gives value in its own right, but often for many of them, it's the beginning of a path that goes to higher levels of education that will ultimately help them fulfill the 2/3 of all the new and replacement jobs in Illinois that now require a college credential. A more recent study looked at all the job ads in Illinois in 2014-15. That were on the web, Burning Glass. Some of you may know that organization. They have a proprietary tool that they use to do that. 54% of the job ads in Illinois during that time period required a BA. Illinois' economy is not Arkansas's economy. It's not where I came from, even Kentucky's economy. Illinois' economy is a high-powered, high need that needs everything from people with welder certificates and early childhood educators, medical scientists, software developers, and we should be happy about that. And we need to meet that need. But the work you're doing in creating those pathways to degrees with embedded credentials, we should be doing that everywhere in Illinois. One of my favorite fundees when I was at Lumina was Western Governors University. And Western Governors only does BAs and masters, but they're competency-based, much like you're shifting to more of a competency focus. Again, you're leading the way for what we need to be doing more broadly in Illinois, where we don't talk about how much time did you spend in a classroom seat, but what did you learn, and we give you credit for learning. The constant needs to be learning, and the variable is time. Right now, time is the constant and learning is the variable. Semester ends, you get a C, you get a D, you get an A, learning varies, but by gosh, that Henry Ford assembly line model of higher education just keeps moving along, right, every semester. But Western Governors doesn't do that, so that when you complete a baccalaureate they have a lot of degrees in IT, business, healthcare, teaching. But when you graduate, you will not only have that BA, you will have every relevant certification, industry recognized and otherwise, built into that BA. So when you go out to look for a job, you not only have the BA, you have all of those certifications. And you're doing that in building and embedding and stackable credentials, and we need to be doing that all over Illinois in the best interest of our students. And finally, as I said here, you're really here creating a model for higher education in Illinois. Now, one of our priorities, one last thing I'll say about the way you're creating a model, before I move on here with a little bit bigger picture, which I was asked to share, the way you're working with adult learners. You're working with people coming back to get that credential and degree, to make them a contributing and a valuable part of our workforce, working with our most precious resource, our young children. We need to learn from you because, as I mentioned earlier, over a fifth of the Illinois workforce currently out there, 25 to 64, 1/5 has some college and no degree. And an even bigger percentage has only high school. We don't get to a 21st century economy with that level of education. But what you're showing is, how do you bring them back? How do you give them those stackable credentials? How do you put them on a path with short-term victories that motivate them and move them on to that next level? So they ultimately end up with a post-secondary education that may well involve associate and baccalaureate and maybe even higher degrees. That's what we've got to do for all of our adults. If you walk out of this building and walk down the streets of Bloomington normal, or if you're in Chicago, I always think of this when I'm walking down the streets of Chicago, every fifth person I pass went to college and didn't succeed. I just count them. I wonder if you're the one. And I will tell you, I've had so many, I'm sorry, I'll just tell one story. Stephanie's heard all these stories before, but I've had this happen 2 or 3 times on a train on the way to Chicago, in a lobby in a hotel. There was the hotel lobby story is the one I'll tell you. This happens over and over and over again. Getting a little conversation, they find out what I do. And this guy he had a $65,000 a year job working for a company. He was there for a business meeting convention, but he didn't have his BA. He was he was a football player who was injured and just dropped out. He is under enormous pressure from his employer to get that degree. Well, he's been online on his own, finding $60,000 type of who knows what kind of options. And so once I explained to him what I did, He said, can I buy you a drink? And I said, well, you don't have to buy it for me. Sure, we can have a drink. So we sat there and talked, and I gave him, just out of the top of my head, I gave him 4 options. 3 in Illinois, and 1 was Western Governors University. And 2 months later, I got an email from him. We exchanged cards. And he said he had ultimately decided to go with Western Governors. Western Governors tuition, competency-based online institution, just received an award for one of the best teacher preparation programs in the country, really high quality, nonprofit, okay? It's just $6,000 a year, and they haven't raised it in 7 years, and they've just committed to not raise it for another 5. They fund themselves on growth. Nevertheless, he enrolled, and he will have his baccalaureate degree in a year and a half, he anticipates, because it's not how much seat time he spends, it's competencies, because he knows a lot. He's a smart guy. He's been in the business world for quite a while. In a year and a half, it cost about $16,000. Now, the problem is, and you guys are showing us how to scale this kind of work up, I can't drink that much. I mean, I can't have that individual conversation with even one drink with every one of those adults, neither can you. So we have to find a way to make ourselves open and ready and provide the pathways for these adults. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment, but you're showing us the way. So I did want to start out there by thanking you and complimenting you, and that's not gratuitous. The competency-based work you're doing is helping us focus on that as a way to go as opposed to seat time. One of my friends, I stole this line. As a faculty member, I have the right to steal from all sources as a teacher. He said, if you're using seat time in a classroom as the proxy for learning, you're focused on the wrong end of the student. Okay? You should be looking at what they're learning, and I love that line. So where are we now, the Illinois context? I'll move through this. Well, you know this. We've got this 60% goal. With those certificates, rigorous definition, we're at 50%. This is part of a 10-year plan for higher education that we put together in Illinois back in 2008-9, and we're already at IBHE talking about starting, if we ever get a budget, convening and thinking about what the next plan looks like. I'm more in favor of 5-year plans. I think 10-year plans are like, who knows, that ice floe could fall off the Antarctic and we could all be underwater in 10 years. But nevertheless, we're already talking about that. Shoot, the way we're going, assuming we don't get derailed by the dysfunction we currently are experiencing, we may need to raise that to 70%. Oregon says 80%. Okay? So at one point, it was like everybody 60%. Oh my gosh, we'll never get there. Well, we're going to get there. And we may want to do better. Here's the Lumina report that just came out Monday, and I'd already sent I was trying to be prepared, and I'd already sent my PowerPoint, so I didn't get a chance to incorporate the 44% in 2014, but it trending upward, right? And psychologists tell us there's no more powerful motivator for human behavior, more than money, more than anything, than trending upward, and we're doing that. So let's go. Now, why must we succeed? Well, I'm speaking to the choir here. I know that. But back in 2008-9, when the public agenda was put together, there was a lot of I wasn't here. Not my credit. It's everybody else's that worked so hard on that. There was a big discussion about 2 Illinois. I never know what I'm supposed to say, 2 Illinois or 2 Illinois. But anyway. And it was about those who have and those who have not. And here's the 2 Illinois, right? So education is supposed to be the ladder, the social mobility piece that begins to even this out. And we know that's happening nationally. The Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce, which was key in doing this credential work for Lumina this time, did this a few years ago, and they said in 1980, a college graduate, now this is 4-year to high school, 2 years in the middle here like it should be, but made 40% more than a high school graduate. And that's about right. If you're meeting your talent needs. I mean, you should get something more for going to college, right? But then by 2010, it was 74% more, and they predicted by our goal date of 2025, a 4-year graduate would make almost double, 100% more than a high school graduate. Well, as good as the Georgetown Center is, I love them. Tony Carnevale is a good friend of mine. They were wrong. We hit 100% in 2013. Okay? So the economy is changing. And these degrees and credentials we're getting people are literally life-saving for them. Pardon the complexity of this, but I thought there might be there it is. But just look at the colored lines. This is what happened during the Great Recession. During the Great Recession afterwards, how many of you heard somebody say, well, we don't need as many college graduates? Or I know a college graduate who's a bartender. I know a college graduate who's a taxi driver, blah, blah, blah. Okay, everybody's got an anecdote. I know someone with 3 eyes in their head, whatever. I don't really, but you get my point. So, but just look at the green line. This is what happened to the job market during the recession for four-year college graduates. We never lost jobs, and in fact, this is February of 2012, and this keeps going up like this. We had 2 million more jobs for four-year college graduates in 2012 than we did even in the best days before the recession. For associate degree holders, we did drop. We lost some jobs, but that recovered by 12, and that continues to go up. Okay? For high school only, we lost 5 points. You've read all this stuff, right? The recession hit those who could least afford it the hardest. We lost 5.6 million jobs, and that just keeps going away. If you only have a high school diploma in today's economy, I can almost guarantee you will be working poor. That is the best you can hope for in your life. So what you're doing in helping these adults move forward and get these certifications and get these associate degrees and get these baccalaureate degrees is literally life-saving for you. I'll throw out one even more startling statistic for you. Some of you may have read of there's been a lot of news. 2 economists won a Nobel Prize for identifying an until then unrecognized trend in American mortality rates. And they found that American whites their mortality rate, meaning the rate at which they were dying, was growing at a rate no one had seen even in the worst days of the HIV epidemic. And that was and everybody's like, what the heck? And almost all of the increase was attributable to suicide and drug-related deaths. And the New York Times followed that up, looking at millions of birth certificates from the 90s to today. And they reinforced that in a broader way. Now, white mortality rates are still not where African American or Hispanic mortality rates are, so I want to be clear here, but mortality rates are continuing to decline, meaning that's a good thing when your mortality rate declines. The white mortality rate is just shooting through the roof. And when they looked at what predicted that, they found that whites with college degrees versus whites with high school or less, the mortality rate for that lower educated group was 6 times higher. So when I gave that number in Georgia, I said, literally, we're dealing with life and death issues here. Because if you don't get the education, you're going to hit a point in your life where nothing turned out the way you planned. One University of Southern California professor who is studying this said, it's not really a health issue. I mean, we do need better health care, et cetera. She said, for these people, life just becomes so hard, they break. So that's what education is. That's what we're doing. I just want to, in case you weren't already, hopefully that's motivating. So there's the economic stuff, which we spend a lot of time on. So what must we do to succeed? Well, I don't think I'm telling people in this room a lot. We've got to focus on 21st century students. And who are they? They're adults. They're students of color. They're people in low income groups. We already educate, I'll give you this chart in just a moment, but for folks in the upper income quartile, we already get 80% of them a college degree. They almost have to jump off the boat to not get a college degree. So all of our growth has to come with these groups, and 75% of our current college students are juggling family and work to get through school. My son, who graduates in May, went full-time, graduating with no debt, he seems to think I ought to get him a gift on top of that. I'm like, you give me a gift. But he's the shrinking minority. Now, as I said, we need to serve those students. We need to get them jobs. Because I moved to Springfield and downsized to a condo. I have no basement, so my son must get a job. But in any case, but nevertheless, These are our students. This is, I didn't get a chance to update this. It's largely the same. There were some minor shifts in one year. But as you can see, 22%, 1 out of 5, some college, no degree, 25%, a quarter of the workforce with only high school, 10% or so with less than high school. So we really have to go after this group and get them a pathway to college, which is what you're doing, which is what makes this work so valuable. And the model you're creating, I'm hoping we can extrapolate to that man I met in the, whether he's going to early childhood or not, a pathway, short, stackable credentials, affordable pathway. We've also got to pay a lot of attention, and I know you are, to our gaps. The second, in addition to increasing adult college completion, the second of 3 major substantive priorities of the Illinois Board of Higher Education, based on the data analysis we've done, is closing gaps. And you can see here that our fastest growing population, this is in the adult population, has the lowest education levels. That's not a recipe for success. Not only that, but as you know, we want to have an early childhood educator workforce that mirrors our early childhood students. And we were rapidly becoming, if we're not already, I haven't kept up, a minority-majority K-12 system. So this is so important for us. This is national data. I wasn't able to break it down yet by Illinois, but this is how income impacts college success. And again, you're working with groups of people who I suspect are, for the most part, not in that top income quartile. So if you look at this number, unless you're willing to say that the wealth of the family into which you are born determines your college worthiness, we got a problem, a big problem. And even look, you wonder why the middle class, what's left of it, is getting upset. Look at this. This is the second tier. This is salary-wise solid middle class. Look at that. So we've got to, and again, these are the populations I know you're working with, and you're finding out ways to get them through and get them to careers and jobs. We need your wisdom. We need your models to expand and scale this. We've also got to remodel the system, and I'll speed this up a little bit because there's a lot of, we can make this available. One thing we need is to make sure our institutions are adult learner focused. You're working largely with adults. That's not been the major market traditionally for most of higher education. And there's an assessment called the ALFI, Adult Learner Focused Institution. We just received a grant, about $300,000 to $400,000 grant we're going to use to work with our institutions. Got to find money somewhere, it's not coming from the state, to work with our institutions to do these ALFI assessments and think about this. Because there's a lot of things we do in higher ed that it's not intentional. We don't mean to make it harder for adults. But in another state I was in, we did get money. We had every institution do this assessment. It was quite amazing. Everybody had a few things they were doing, or most of the time, that were good. But I'll give you one quick example, and hopefully we're way beyond this in 2016. This was back in the mid-2004-05. But many of our universities, and our community colleges even, their student services office, financial aid, advising, everything a student needs, opened at 8 or 8:30, closed for lunch, and closed at 4:30 or 5. And because those are some of the questions you ask when you do this survey. And they were like, Oh, and they didn't take appointments. Because these are just students, after all. They can drop by and hang out till we're ready to see them. And if you drop by, if there's nobody ahead of you, we'll see you immediately. If there's 3 people ahead of you, you just wait till we get the other 3 taken care of, and then you come in. And someone said, well, how would that do for a working adult who's taking time off from work or trying to get in right after work before they have to go home and fix dinner for their family? Not so well. So we went through a big reorganization. It turned out there were all kinds of people in those student services offices that wanted flex time. They wanted to come to work at 9 or 10 in the morning so they could drop their kids off at school and stay till 5 or 5:30. They wanted to work through lunch and get out early. I mean, flex time is something that's kind of a benefit. So that was an easy win-win. We were able to open up our offices, be accessible to adults, and make happier employees. It's not all that easy. You've got to do things with faculty. You've got to think of how you deliver the courses. You can help us think through all this, given the work that you're doing. We've got to make sure that we have, and you work guided pathways, very efficient pathways to credentials and degrees. People just can't, we let students wander around too much. And I know some people say, well, students need to grow, they need to explore. Well, if you got the money, I say explore all you want. But every adult learner I know has a big neon sign across their forehead that says, don't waste my time. I got too much to do. Get me in here, get me what I need, and get me out. And that's also true of first generation, low income, and many students of color who have no safety net. I always tell people I never had a closer relationship with my son than the first year in college, when he finally realized that having a former professor as his father was a good thing. And he would text me all the time, asking me questions. Here's a kid who went to an elite high school, college track, blah, blah, blah. He still was confused when he got to college with all this stuff. But he always could text me, and I had this one, I wish I'd saved it, where he said, Dad, why do all these old guys keep lecturing to us in classrooms? Why don't they just put this in the cloud, and then we could get to come to class and do real work? And I said, well, Dylan, that's called the flipped classroom, and we're working on that, but clearly we're not there yet. But in any case, we've got to make sure that we are offering the courses when students need them so they can take them in a timely way to follow the pathway. We need to be intrusive advisors. In loco parentis is back, my friends, even for adults, to make sure that they're staying on that pathway. If they start to get off it, we need to intervene quickly. Because one reason we have 22% of our adults in Illinois with some colleges no degree is because they got lost, they lost track of why they were there, what they were actually trying to accomplish, or they ran out of money because they took all these classes they didn't need to take. So we've got to get on that. Competencies, we've got to move to that. Western Governors still has courses, but the courses are defined in terms of competencies. And if you can challenge a course and take assessments, good assessments that have been put together by expert assessment people, and show you already know all that stuff, they give you the credit. We've got a task force working right now on veterans. I can't tell you how many veterans I talked to. I talked to, he was an air traffic controller in the military. He went through all this training, all these courses. He landed multi-gazillion-dollar government jets at airports all over the world for the military. And he came back. This particular student wasn't going in Illinois. He was going, I won't name the institution, but it's a really well-known engineering institution just across the border in Indiana. And he came back, and they said, well, we only accept 12 of those kinds of credits. That's what he told me anyway. So he said, Dr. Applegate, I'm sitting in all these classes. And if they're a test class, I don't even go to class. I just go and take the test and make 100. And he said, the problem with this is you're paying for it because I'm on the GI Bill. Your tax dollars are paying for it. And I also happen to know this BA program I'm in to advance my career is very, very popular. And my chair is always telling the dean he doesn't have enough money to offer enough seats in the classes for all the students who want to take this course. He said, Dr. Applegate, I keep telling him, give them my seat. I don't need to be here. So the more we can accelerate, we also know from national studies that if an adult gets any prior learning credit, any, based on competencies or whatever, it doubles the chances they'll complete the credential or degree. So it's really important to think about that. Break down the silos. I know a lot of the people we're working with in these programs, they're eligible for all kinds of programs, WIOA, TANF, other kinds of programs. Right now, and we've been having this conversation with DCEO and others to create one-stops, because why should you have to, I always often say, to get access to all of your benefits in the system we currently have, and I blame the feds for part of this, you have to have a college degree to know how to get the money to get a college degree. And you have to go to 17 different agencies and prove you're poor 17 different times in 17 different ways. So we've got to make sure they're getting all that support. Employers, we're working hard. We have some good models, as usual, in pockets in Illinois where employers are stepping up and providing assistance and support, whether it's moral support or time off or time at the workplace or tuition reimbursement or varieties of things they're doing to help their employees get the education they need. It doesn't always have to be one for that job and with that employer. It can be becoming an early childhood educator. We need to focus on partnerships. You know, if we could have we have a lot of regional work going on in Illinois now. Think about as these programs, if they're embedded within a larger regional effort around raising education levels and improving education quality, where you have employers and local community foundations and the mayor of the city. We have some of this going on in Illinois. And the mayor of the city and the higher ed folk and the K-12 folk all together saying, let's think about how we're all going to work together in a multi-sector partnership to advance the education levels of our region. That's the kind of partnership that we need. So, and it's helpful because sometimes it can't all be on us. As hard as we're working, we need others at the table. College to career, I won't spend a lot of time on that. So I'll conclude by simply saying that, I think a lot of what we're doing here, and you're doing it's not rocket surgery. Like I said, give people credit for what they already know to accelerate their progress, create transparent, good pathways that keep them from taking a lot of excess credits, give them good advising, so they can pick the right pathway and stay on it, stack the credentials so they can earn things along the way in case they have to stop out for a while. They've got something they can use. I mean, if you were had an empty whiteboard and you were designing a higher ed system for the 21st century student, I don't think it would take Albert Einstein to figure out some of these things that you would want in the system. But for some reason, it's really hard for us to make the shift from our traditional modes, and you guys are helping us do that. And it is, and you're helping it do it, but it does take, I think, that overall long-term multi-sector commitment. And I will conclude with something from Stephen Johnson's book, Future Perfect. Very thin book, if you happen to want to read it. But early on in the book, Stephen Johnson, it's about how we do change. How do we make change in our system? And he talks about the progressive movements. And the United States is known for some powerful progressive politics that made real changes. We don't want to forget that. And we've historically been a country of pragmatists, wanting to solve problems. The only respectable school that I know of, the philosophy that the United States has ever produced, is pragmatism with James Dewey and Robert Park and the Chicago School of Sociology. But he says we have blamed the media. We always want to blame the media, blame somebody, but we're kind of in this era of heroes and miracles, where we're waiting for some hero to come along and a miracle to happen, and then it will all be right. And there are people who look back historically and they say, Martin Luther King was the hero and the civil rights movement was the miracle. No. There were people working in the 40s and 50s. There's a decades-long history of people working together, large numbers of people. Rosa Parks was trained at a school in North Carolina on how to do effective civil disobedience before she said no on that bus. And she knew what to do and how to make that happen correctly. So, but the story tells about the hero miracle versus progressive long-term commitment is around the miracle on the Hudson. I know that's been a little bit of a while. How many of you remember the miracle on the Hudson? Okay, it's still well known. Who's the hero? Captain Scully, right? And the crew, right? And the miracle was the birds hit the plane and the plane landed flat and they stood, pictures of them standing on the wings. And okay, so Stephen Johnson tells this version of the story, and I checked with some aeronautics folks at some of our programs, and they said, this is kind of right. So way back in the 90s, when a lot of people were dying in airplane crashes, 80s and 90s, and then we entered this period of unprecedented safety, at least in public air transportation, for all of us who travel. How'd that happen? Well, thousands, literally, of people in the industry, engineers, aeronautics people, and others, began to confront the brutal facts, right? We always say if you're going to make change, the first thing you have to do is confront the brutal facts. How many kids in Illinois aren't getting early childhood education? What's happening to them? Et cetera, et cetera. You got to confront the brutal facts. And theirs were pretty brutal. Like they had videos of their brutal facts, like planes crashing in the ground, body parts all over the land, et cetera. And so they said, well, what's going on here? Why is this happening? And so it's complicated, but the two things he points to, two conclusions they came to of many. One was, part of the problem was the engines were too fragile. Too quickly when something happened, they would catch fire or blow up and shred the plane, and then you got no control. And And the second thing was that the guidance system went out too easily. So they worked on those other things too, but they really worked on those two things. So the point is, so when those birds hit that plane over the Hudson in New York, and what did the engine do? It stopped. Didn't catch fire, didn't blow up, pieces of the engine didn't hit the plane, it just stopped. And when Captain Scully, is still a hero, I'm not saying he's not a hero, but he was landing the plane, his guidance system was still in operation. He could tell whether he was flat or not. You know, that little thing, you know. And so he was able to bring the plane in because doing that without a guidance system would be all but impossible. You'd almost certainly hit wing first. So the point is, those people are alive today, certainly because of the good efforts of this crew, but they're also because thousands of people in an area of work came together, confronted the brutal facts, looked at the problem, worked on it for more than a decade, solved it, and ushered in an era of unprecedented air safety. That's what it takes. And for Illinois to have an early childhood system with quality educators, accessible to all the students who need it, who will then get that head start, that jump start, to move on and get their high school diplomas and get their college degrees, it will take that from all of us. And the people in this room can say, you were here, you're part of that, you're a central part of that, and we need to engage others in our regions and our institutions. And if we do that, Illinois will be a better state, people will live better lives, and we can all look back on that and feel really good about the work that we're doing, which you should. Thank you very much. Just a slight promo, we do a bulletin if you want to check on our site every 2 weeks, updating on higher ed events in Illinois, and I have a little Applegate update in there where we talk about things like this, and so there's the site for it. But I think we wanted to just a few minutes, maybe I went a little long, but a few minutes for a minute or two. I can take one or two questions, and then I know we want to move on to the discussion, the panel discussion. Any questions? Well, that means I was either really boring or really great. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.